Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for joining Heritage Talks Online. If you've joined us before for the Heritage Talks series, welcome back. And if this is your first time tuning in, it's very nice to have you with us this evening. I understand there are quite a few people joining us tonight from the Vimy Foundation. And so I give you a very warm welcome on this day, the day before Vimy Ridge Day, that is. So thank you very much for coming and joining us tonight. My name is Heather Darch, and I'm joined today by Glenn Patterson, and we are project directors for the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network, otherwise known as QAHN. QAHN is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to preserve and promote the history, heritage, and culture of Quebec, and in particular of English-speaking communities spread right across the province. If you go to our website at QAHN.org, you'll discover a wide range of activities and projects that we're involved in. All of our projects, including Heritage Talks Online, are successful in large part because of the generous support that we receive from our community of supporters like you who are joining us this evening. So thank you very much. You're welcome to become a member of QAHN, and membership is open to everyone, including community groups and heritage organizations. So please check out our website for more information about us and our many projects, and to keep up to date with what we're doing and to discover and connect with the organizations that are in our network across Quebec. Membership enables us to provide quality workshops and programs and projects that you cannot find anywhere else, including our great publication called Quebec Heritage News. And this is filled with really well-researched articles and images about Quebec's history. So if you love a good read, if you love good stories about history that you cannot find in history textbooks, and we know those kinds of stories, I encourage you to become a member and receive your own copy for yourself. This is a good time actually to become a member of QAHN. For first-time new members, you can take advantage of a special 30% discount promotion for a one-year membership. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live tonight, you can send us a private message during our Facebook presentation saying that you would like to claim the discount. And if you're on Zoom tonight, you can also send us a message saying that you'd like to take advantage of the discount. But bear in mind, it's only good for the length of time of the broadcast. It's also a good time to become a member because we've just published an anthology called Historical Views, Selections from Quebec Heritage News 2000 to 2020. This is a 2-volume set of 120 articles and over 150 images from writers and historians that have contributed to Quebec Heritage News over the last 20 years. So the deals are coming hard and fast right now to join QAHN. So I would encourage you to please become a member. I would like to take the opportunity to thank the funders who make this series possible, including Canadian Heritage, the Secretariat for Relations with English-Speaking Quebecers, the Chalkers Foundation, the Zeller Family Foundation, and the Townshippers Foundation. Thank you very much for your support. The Heritage Talk Online series has a super lineup of more talks to still come up until June. And you can discover all of the dates of the broadcast and the speakers and the themes right on our Heritage Talks Facebook page. You don't have to have your own Facebook account to find this. QAHN has a public site, so you can just go there to find the information. And the posts about the different speakers also have links to join the Zoom. So you can just click on and pre-register for a Zoom presentation. I would like to introduce you to my co-host tonight, Glenn Patterson, who is helping me with all of the technical part of the presentation. And he has a few words to say, particularly to our Zoom users. Hi, Glenn.
Hi, Heather. Thanks for that. Yes, we're doing things a little different tonight, only because we have such a fantastic, but also massive turnout. So you may have noticed when you tried to join the call, it asked for permission for me to unmute you. That'll just be during the question and answer. If you have a question, we'll use it then. But yeah, basically for now, you won't be able to unmute yourself, but that's good because we're having a presentation and there's over 100 of us on here. Eventually, if you're looking for your start microphone and start video buttons, if you're on a computer, it's in the bottom left hand of your screen. If you're on a smartphone, just tap on the screen and you should see at the bottom like a little camcorder icon. That's to start your video. and a microphone, which you won't be able to use just yet, but it's coming, I promise. If you could, during the first part of, during Caitlyn's presentation, if you could turn off your video, it'll just give her a little bit more bandwidth. You don't have to, but it would just, it would help us out. So thanks for your consideration there. Yes, so when we do get to the Q&A, because we have so many people, what I'd like you to do is if you would like to ask a question, just send us a message in the QA, say, I have a question for Caitlyn, and then you can start your video and I'll turn on your microphone for you and you can ask your question. If you're not comfortable being on camera, that's no problem. Just type out your question and I'll relay it to Caitlyn for you. The other thing I do want to say, and you would have gotten a notice about this when you joined the Zoom call, is we are recording tonight and we're simultaneously streaming this to Facebook. So if you're interested, you can watch this afterwards on the Heritage Talks Facebook page. At some point in the future, we'll also put it on the QAHN YouTube channel. And just in terms of consent, when you joined the call, there was a little notification notifying you that this was being recorded. And that by being here, you basically consent to being recorded. So if you don't want to be on the recorded footage, just keep your mic and video off and you won't appear. Otherwise, if you want to be even more anonymous, you can leave the Zoom call and just watch on Facebook Live if you don't plan to ask any questions during the Q&A. So that's all I have for now. Heather, why don't you come back and introduce tonight's speaker?
Great, thanks, Glenn. Yes, our guest speaker this evening is Caitlyn Bailey. Caitlyn is an accomplished nonprofit leader and public history professional and is the executive director of two successful heritage nonprofits, the Vimy Foundation and the Canadian Centre for the Great War. She is committed to highlighting the role of Canada's history in public life and its contribution to maintaining a civil society. A graduate of the University of Calgary and McGill, Caitlyn holds degrees in Russian literature and library and information sciences. She's a member of the Banff Forum and a director of the Toronto Ward Museum. Her talk is called The Man Behind the Curtain, Andrew McNaughton and the First World War. Hello, Caitlyn, and welcome to Heritage Talks.
Thanks so much, Heather. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone who's come out this evening. It's wonderful to see so many faces. It's wonderful to see so many familiar names as well from all the different groups that are here tonight. So it's really my pleasure to be marking the 104th anniversary of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, or the eve, I should say, of the 104th Battle of Vimy Ridge this evening with everyone tonight. So thank you. So Heather's already touched a little bit on the organizations that I run. The Canadian Centre for the Great War, which is quite familiar to the group here from QAHN tonight, is a museum that is dedicated to the social history of the First World War in Canada. It's located in Montreal and I have run it since 2014. The Vimy Foundation, which is a national organization that many people on the call are familiar with. I've been running that since 2019. The Vimy Foundation is one of Canada's premier First World War organizations. We provide scholarship opportunities for young people to learn more about the First World War and develop their leadership skills, as well as many other national commemorative activities like the activity that we're participating in tonight. I'd like to take a moment just to acknowledge a few people who are here with us this evening. There are members of Andrew McNaughton's family who have come to spend the evening with us, which I very much appreciate. Thank you so much for your enthusiasm. We have photographs actually in the slideshow that is going to run during my presentation that are from the McNaughton family. So thank you. I'd also just like to say hello to my mom, who is here tonight from Calgary, and my uncle, who's here tonight from Kelowna. So it's really lovely to see you both, and I hope you all enjoy the evening. I will be presenting in English tonight. However, the question period is going to be bilingual. Donc, vous pouvez poser toutes vos questions dans votre langue préférée. C'est pas de problème. So without any further ado, we're going to get started this evening, and we're going to dive into the world of one of my favorite people, Andrew McNaughton. So, as I said, I'm here tonight to speak to you about one of my favorite figures of the First World War. and a Montrealer by choice, Andrew George Latta McNaughton. At one point, McNaughton was lauded as the best known Canadian soldier, with streets and buildings named in his honor. But in the city where he began his career at McGill and the province where he retired, McNaughton is not particularly well remembered. However, along with Arthur Currie, Andrew McNaughton was one of the leading contributors to the success of the Canadian Corps during the First World War, and an innovative leader in the adaptation of military technology for mass warfare. Call me controversial, but I would say that McNaughton, as much as Currie, is responsible for the victory at Vimy Ridge on the 9th of April, 1917. What can I say? I love my underdogs, and I'm willing to argue that point with you in the question period. So bring me your questions about that. McNaughton was born in what is now Saskatchewan in February 1887, and he's a graduate of Bishop's College School at Lennoxville, Quebec. From there, he went on to do a BA in physics and engineering at McGill while serving in a local militia artillery unit. McNaughton finished his master's in 1912, and he's shown here in the slide around age 25, the year of his graduation, looking very dashing in a photograph from Notman and Son photography studio here in Montreal. And he worked as a professor at McGill until the outbreak of the First World War in August 1914. During his time at McGill, McNaughton began to experiment with the use of cathode ray tubes and the newly available oscillograph, which is a machine that measures alternating currents, both of which he used during the First World War to develop the counter-battery techniques that cemented his career and his name. One very common statement that's attributed to the First World War is that it was a gunner's war. The technological advances of the 19th century and the arms race of the early 20th century meant that the artillery pieces that were used had become capable of shooting shells weighing hundreds of pounds, hundreds of kilometers, and were easily manufactured in massive industrial factories. The big guns, as they were called, destroyed territory, reducing the Western Front to the muddy, pockmarked quagmire that we associate with the First World War, and inflicted horrific wounds from flying shrapnel. Constant shelling moved the war underground, and by the time McNaughton and the Canadian Corps arrived in France in 1915, the Allied and the German forces were both fighting from fortified tunnels and trenches in a gory war of attrition. This photograph, which was colorized by the Vimy Foundation in 2018, and is from the National Collection at Library and Archives Canada, is a very typical example of a First World War gun. This is a naval gun, so it was actually originally meant for use on board a ship. It would have been removed and then mounted on the chassis that you see here. This particular gun was cut down and they were used on the front, all along the front. So they were extremely, extremely powerful, and they were extremely difficult to essentially to figure out what you were going to do with them. Like many ranking Canadian officers of the First World War, McNaughton had direct combat experience, leading the 4th Battery to France in 1915 and being injured at the Second Battle of Ypres in April 1915. McNaughton understood what trench warfare was like, and he knew very intimately how heavy artillery, like this gun here in the image, made it almost impossible for an attacking force to overwhelm its opponents. The challenge of the Allied forces in the first 2 years of the war was exactly that. And it's how does an attacking force that is naturally in movement, that is naturally moving forward and trying to overcome towards an objective, overwhelm and defeat a defender who has a deeply fortified defense system and fixed artillery positions that is firing from guns like this one in the photograph. Overwhelming artillery fire is one way to deal with this. But the shell shortages in 1915 and 1916 in the British Army and her colonial allies, Canada and the Anzacs, meant that the targets had to be chosen very carefully to reduce ammunition wastage. You couldn't just be firing off in hundreds of millions of shells and hope to overwhelm the enemy that way. The possibility also of hitting your own men was extremely high. And the infantry often treated the artillery with distrust. They didn't want to have an artillery emplacement next to them in their trench, for example, because they thought that the artillery emplacements drew enemy fire, and the shorts, which are, don't reach their objective would very likely kill them instead of the enemy. McNaughton himself wrote in 1920 that the artillery situation was not such as to inspire confidence in the minds of our infantry. Accuracy was a problem, and despite the advances in the size and the range of artillery used in the First World War, the techniques to fix shots had not really evolved with it. Gunners relied heavily on visual sightings and did very little to counteract environmental effects such as wind, temperature, or air pressure. This next photograph is a classic First World War gun pit. So this is a dug-in emplacement where the gun is put into the emplacement. It's fortified. You can see the sandbags all around the edges, and then it's concealed from airplane reconnaissance with a camouflage net. So these gun emplacements could be anywhere from a couple of 100 meters behind the front lines to several kilometers behind the front lines. And the challenge was trying to figure out where these were and then deal with them in an effective way. The questions of efficiency, accuracy, and the best use of artillery occupied McNaughton during his 1915 convalescence period. And being the type of man who likes to solve a problem, he began refining ranging techniques, including a procedure called flash spotting, which is later used to accurately locate and take out enemy guns. McNaughton recognized that the old-fashioned artillery technique of firing a shot at what you could see did not work in trench warfare, and began to create and use hidden forward spotting posts to better locate the flashes of enemy guns. The Corps had the capacity to use air surveillance and photography right from the beginning of the war. But like many of the technologies that were seen in the 1915-1916 period, they were actually used separately and they weren't integrated fully into a system of observation. During 1915 and 1916, McNaughton was a relatively unknown officer. He was an officer, but he was a junior officer, and his ideas, which he published like a good scientist, were not widely implemented. He climbed the military ladder, however, to the rank of lieutenant colonel in 1916, commanding 11 Brigade Royal Canadian Artillery in Britain and France. And in early 1917, McNaughton got what was essentially his big break. It was a promotion to counter battery staff officer at Canadian Corps official headquarters. At this time, the role of the CBSO was not particularly clear, but in a short time, McNaughton had arranged for an observational trip to British 5 Corps, and he'd spent time with Douglas Haig, who had overseen the disastrous Somme offensive of 1916 and seems, oddly enough, to have absolutely no compunction about telling this newly appointed staff officer exactly what went wrong at the Somme. Running parallel to McNaughton's promotion and the time spent with British 5 Corps was preparation for a new large spring offensive that would take place in the Arras area under the direction of the British commander Julian Byng, and with the assistance of Arthur Currie, who was then the commander of the 1st Division Canadian Corps. The Canadian Corps was planning for their first big engagement since 1916, which was taking Vimy Ridge. In many ways, Vimy was a textbook example of the challenges that were faced by the Allies throughout the war. It was the highest point in the area. It had been occupied since 1914 successively and unbroken by a significant German force, and waves of British and French attacks had been unsuccessful in dislodging them from the ridge. The defenses were hundreds of meters deep. They were heavily fortified. They included concrete emplacements, bunkers, dugouts, tunnels, and dug-in artillery emplacements that were capable of firing downwards onto the attackers. So the attack that you were making at Vimy Ridge was automatically uphill, which was an enormous disadvantage. Since 1914, over 100,000 soldiers had died at Vimy Ridge already in trying to attack it and defend it. And calling it a charnel house would really not have been much of an exaggeration. Working feverishly to bring scientific method and techniques that he'd been tweaking since 1915 to his new position, McNaughton began to lay out an ambitious counter-battery plan that would finally unite the use of military intelligence, signals, and artillery to create a system of information to accurately range and use artillery to maximum effect. The plan required targeted location of all opposing artillery guns in the area and a systematic destruction of as many emplacements as possible before the battle. The day of battle, the artillery would switch its focus to providing a precisely timed creeping barrage for the advance of the infantry and targeted removals of objectives like remaining guns and machine gun nests, which would be called in to the artillery teams by the signals units. So this is an example of a classic First World War artillery spotting system. And you can see it's quite complex. You have the OPs, which are the observation posts. You have the aerial observation, which is taking photographs and spotting. You have tethered air balloons as well, which were also taking positions. And all of that information is being communicated back and forth through telephone, Morse code, and different types of communication between both the infantry units, the artillery units, the divisional artillery units, and then finally back to the CBSO at Corps headquarters. So it's a really, really complicated system. It requires that everybody be cooperating with each other, and it also requires that the lines of communication remain unbroken. So it's a huge logistical challenge to be able to do something like this type of artillery spotting. So while he was planning all of this artillery participation, McNaughton also continued to tinker with the science. And so he engaged a team of scientists to work with him. He'd met scientists while he was working with British 5 Corps, and he was able to continue that tradition of trying to have scientists work with the military at brigade headquarters to try to look at these questions. And they worked on anything from assessing the point at which a gun barrel was worn out and would affect accuracy to the precise calibration of muzzle velocity. McNaughton's artillery was a far cry from the pre-war gunners shooting at what they could see. So McNaughton's work was put to the test at Vimy Ridge on the 9th of April, 1917. A 2-week bombardment removed 83% of the 212 identified German artillery positions, according to the Canadian historian Tim Cook. And the creeping barrage protected the 4 Canadian divisions as they advanced up the ridge, completing their objective by April 12, 1917. McNaughton's work saved lives. In many ways, his plan became the model for how the Canadian Corps went on to fight in 1917 and 1918, establishing their reputation and ensuring that the Corps never lost an engagement in the final years of the war. Each engagement began with the location and removal of as many opposing guns as possible, and then a creeping barrage and the use of individual artillery pieces to remove specific targets as they were located on the day of the battle. So that's, again, anything from a gun that's moved to a machine gun nest, a dugout, a bunker, any of those things that come across as the infantry is advancing over the front lines. All of this system that was used was planned in even shorter and shorter periods of time for ever more difficult objectives. And I think this is a really, really important thing to note, is that Vimy, which was logistically very complex, had over 3 months of planning. It had a significant period of time where every point that was going on could be planned and every action could be practiced. And it's one of the things that, you know, we're taught when we learn about the Battle of Vimy Ridge, was the planning and the practice and the messaging and all the things that went into making Vimy Ridge a success. However, by 1918, during the 100 Days battles, to give you a comparison, planning for something that was, in many cases, sometimes even double the size of Vimy Ridge, battles like Canal du Nord, battles like Amiens, were being planned in a matter of weeks, if not days. So it's a huge testament to how much the Canadian Corps had improved and how much the Corps understood what it was that it had to do. And this goes for all of the arms of the Corps, including the artillery. This system of spotting has to be implemented every single time you're running a battle. So it's immensely complex. Even today, the idea of covering fire and the communication between the front and the rear lines to direct firing on unseen targets, which are getting, you know, as we know, further and further and further, right down to drones that are directed from, you know, the United States in Pakistan. The these ideas harken back to the work that McNaughton did in the First World War of identifying unseen targets, communicating, and bringing that whole system together to make it work. By the end of the war, McNaughton was acknowledged within military circles to be the best artillery officer of any of the armies currently engaged. And that includes the German army and the Austro-Hungarian army. His work and the work of his office pushed the military establishment forward. One British general commented that, in fact, the artillery took the fun out of war. And by the end of the war, artillery officers were frequently known to be the wonks of the army with their thermometers and their signal balloons and all of their different tests. And the wonkiest wonk of them all, Andrew McNaughton, was promoted to brigadier general in 1918. So this is a photograph that was taken of 1919. He's here in his uniform. And in 1920, took a role in the regular force. His days as a civilian professor of electrical engineering at McGill were over. Post-war, it seems like you can't really look at any aspect of the government and not find Andrew McNaughton. His prodigious energies, which allowed him to create the entire artillery plan for the Battle of Vimy Ridge in less than 3 months, were put towards everything from the militia question and whether or not Canada needed a militia or a regular force, to dealing with the Great Depression and the large numbers of unemployed and homeless men that were in Canada at the time. By 1929, he was the chief of staff of the regular forces, and in the 1930s was battling for increased budgets and promoting the exploration and the mapping of the North, all while continuing to publish in scientific journals and inventing the cathode ray direction finder, an early ancestor of radar. In 1935, he retired from the Army and was the head of the National Research Council of Canada before returning to the service at the outbreak of the Second World War. So these photographs that you see here are Second World War era Andrew McNaughton. So we have a photograph from 1943 as Lieutenant General, and then we have 2 photographs that were contributed to us tonight from the McNaughton family. He was appointed commander of Canadian First Army in 1942, which was a position he held until the end of 1943. His second post-war life included being Minister of National Defense in 1944, a term as a diplomat, as ambassador to the United Nations from 1947 to 1949, and an appointment to the International Joint Commission from 1950 to 1962. So he got around. McNaughton died on the 11th of July, 1966 at the age of 79 in Montreal. It's difficult when you know something about these people not to contrast McNaughton's post-war career with that of his commander, Arthur Currie. Currie's return to civilian life after the war was less easy than McNaughton's. Like McNaughton, he received a post in the regular force, serving as Inspector General before retiring in 1920 after a long conflict with existing Army command over reforming how the force was organized. He was offered a position as Principal and Vice Chancellor of McGill shortly afterwards, which he held until his death. Currie was celebrated as an able administrator, but a public and acrimonious libel trial in 1927 damaged his reputation and damaged his health, and he died in 1933 of a stroke. However, posthumously, Currie is still seen as the non plus ultra of the Canadian First World War commanders. He is the Canadian First World War commander that everyone knows and people recognize, and one of the heroes of the war, and he certainly was. The Canadian Corps owes an immense amount of its success to Arthur Currie. However, I still would say that for me, I would hope that when you think of Arthur Currie following this presentation this evening, you also take a moment to think about Andrew McNaughton, the man who worked with him, and his energies and his ability to synthesize, his ability to think in enormous systems that allowed the Corps to continue to see the success that it did. So I hope that my presentation today will have allowed you to think a little bit more about him, and that will have changed the thought about what the Battle of Vimy Ridge and Arthur Currie mean to you. So I'll leave it there this evening. We have plenty of time for questions. We're very excited to see what your questions are, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. My goodness, you've opened up a new element of Vimy Ridge for me. I knew nothing about the artillery spotting system that you described and how complicated it was. And so how brilliant that Mr. McNaughton was, to come up with something like that, and how he rose through the ranks. And you think if he hadn't climbed through the ranks, that this may never have happened. So I was wondering, how did he climb through the ranks? Do you happen to know? Was it just was it just a normal procedure for him, or did he do something in particular to grab the attention of the higher ups at the time?
Absolutely. Well, I think there are a couple of factors at play. One being that he was an officer coming into the war. He was a militia officer already. So he had a certain level of rank, and the Canadian Corps was very active after 1916 from promoting within the ranks. So they really valued the experience that people like McNaughton and Curry had to allow them to command the Canadian Corps. So he was a very able officer. He was an officer to start with. He was extremely able. He was very good at his job. And as the Corps grew and started to move away from British command, it became clear that those were the types of officers that they needed. So he climbed very, very quickly.
Great, thank you.
Now
Now we're going to see. Yeah, go ahead, Glenn.
I can do my PSA now. Hello, everyone on Zoom. You can either type your question in the box and I'll relay it to Caitlin on your behalf, or if you want to come on the mic and the camera, just leave a message in the chat box that says I have a question, and we'll get to in turn. If you're looking for the chat box on a computer in Zoom, it's at the bottom. There's like a little chat bubble there. Click on that and just type your message. If you're on a smartphone, you might need to tap your phone, and then a menu will come up and you'll see more, and click on more, and in there you should see chat. So yes, I'm gonna follow that up with Facebook people. You can leave your comments on Facebook and I will try to hop over there and relay them back. But in the meantime, Ian McGregor is wondering, Caitlin, has a biography been written of McNaughton?
Yes, there is a biography for McNaughton. It was written in the 60s. It's by John Swetnam, and it's 2 very, very large volumes. But to my knowledge, there really hasn't been very much since. So his heyday of fame was in the 50s and 60s. And since then, there hasn't been a lot of work done on him.
Right. I also see in the comments here, David Miller mentioned there was another biography. Oh, I guess he's just asking the question. Anyways, here's just a comment from Philippe Lefebvre. He says, hello, bonjour, mon nom est Philippe Lefebvre et je suis le président de la 3e batterie d'artillerie de campagne de Montréal. So thank you. Merci, Philippe, for votre commentaire. Any other questions? Just type away in the chat box.
Wonderful. I do see someone has sent me a message about the Vimy Oaks, so I can answer about the Vimy Oaks as well. The Vimy Oaks are a project that we've been working on since 2017. We still have Vimy Oaks available in the Vimy Centennial Park in France, but the stock of Vimy Oaks that are available in Canada is now sold out. So we have a few people here from the Vimy Oaks group tonight. So hi, Monty and team. It's really great to see you. But if people are interested in opportunities for the Vimy Oaks, they can get in touch with the Vimy Foundation after this event.
Lovely. I see the questions are just flying in now. This is wonderful. I'm going to read some off Facebook. I see Derek McClellan is asking, the Canadian Army during the Great War was very good at innovation, such as McNaughton's development of counter battery. Is there any insight why the Canadians would be good innovators as opposed to the regular British Army or the French Army for that matter?
Yeah, I think everybody has an opinion on that. I will give you my opinion. It wasn't necessarily that the Canadians were better innovators. And when I mentioned in my presentation that McNaughton had spent a lot of time with 5 Corps. sorry, I have cats, and with learning from 5 Corps. And that was not an uncommon thing to do. Curry, before Vimy Ridge, spent a lot of time with the French army, again, asking questions about what went wrong, what were things that they had noticed. And I think really the thing that is important to know for innovation for the Canadian Corps was that they were very willing to embrace it. They were really open to trying new things. They were open to implementing those, studying them, asking questions, learning, implementing, and changing as they went along, which I think really, really stood them in good stead. The other really helpful thing for Canada, which is something that we don't really talk about very much, was that the army, in comparison to the British Army or the French Army, was really small. So it seems huge to us. It was 100,000 people that participated in the Vimy offensive, or the Vimy battle, I should say. But in terms of the scale of the British Army, it was one unit of the British Army. And so it's so much easier to implement something like, McNaughton's plans for artillery spotting within a smaller unit and try it, because you're able to try it across the whole unit rather than trying to implement something like that across the entire British Army in the space of 3 months.
Very good. I want to read one more Facebook question. Someone was wondering how significant his role was in World War II.
So McNaughton was very significant in the Second World War. He was the top general up until the end of 1943. He was involved with the Minister of Defense, as the Minister of Defense, I should say, in 1944, involved in many of the difficulties around the conscription crisis. He was, you saw the picture of him with the King. He was consulted and very, very close with Mackenzie King as well. So he was really, really involved throughout the Second World War. I see also from the question box, Andrew Leslie is General McNaughton's grandson and is just interested in making a comment. So whenever you wanted to move that in, Glenn, you can.
Sure, Andrew, I just unmuted you. Why don't you come on the mic?
Great. I don't know if you can see me.
You can start your video. I can send you a message to do that.
Oh, here you are.
Perfect.
You.
Perfect, you got it.
That was a great presentation, and I thank you for it. You probably can't read that terribly well, if at all, but it's just an interesting tidbit. Oh, there we go.
Perfect.
This is an invitation to Andrew McNaughton from an infantry regiment that he was supporting just immediately prior to the Battle of Mons in 1918, where despite the horrors of the First World War, there was still a bit of a social life, very artificial, of course. And they're inviting him to a dance at the Hotel de Ville, which is a bit of a joke because by that time, the Hotel de Ville was nothing but a big hole. But it shows essentially that they actually had to live there for years on end, which is quite remarkable. And the second one was, you probably can't see this either, and I'm sorry, maybe I could have sent it to you earlier, but it's a book that General McNaughton wrote based on his experience in the First World War while he was the Army commander of the Canadian Army in 1943, full of technical details. So ever the scientist, in the middle of running an army, getting ready to go and do a whole variety of things in Europe, and then in England itself, he was writing scientific notes on artillery fire. That's all I have to say. A great presentation, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. It's honestly, it's what I love about him. And I think it's really important that we emphasize this, is that, he had this huge career that I described to everyone. He was in 2 world wars, in high command in 2 world wars, and he never stopped being a scientist. And he published, and he has patents, and he continued to participate in science and engineering throughout his life, which is just astonishing to me, that you can have this huge career as a public figure and be running an army, and at the same time still be thinking about gun velocity and muzzle wearing. It's fantastic.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Andrew. Lovely to have you on. Someone asked about watching this after. Yes, if you go to the QAHN Heritage Talks Facebook, that's QAHN. If you go to the video section of our Facebook page, you'll see this, and we'll share the link with Caitlyn and her organization tomorrow, and she can send it around. We have there's so many questions. I'm sorry if I forget anyone, but Karen Leslie asks if the Canadian battalions were not considered cannon fodder by the British Army and generals. And she was wondering how the Canadians stick-handled around British general incompetency. Beatrice Osler Hampson.
Thank you. Yes, I'm not sure I would classify it as cannon fodder specifically, but the British Army in the initial period of the war was fairly dismissive of, what they termed as being colonials. And as the war continued, and as certainly after Vimy Ridge, the Canadian Corps became kind of known as the group that was sent into really difficult situations. So if there was something tough that needed to be done, then they were sending the Canadian Corps. And really, I think the stick handling, as you say, Karen, was down to one man, and it was Arthur Currie. Arthur Currie was adamant about a couple of things. One was that he was not going to unnecessarily waste the lives of his soldiers. So he fought really, really hard to only go into engagements that he felt could be won. And the other was not to break up the Canadian Corps, which was something that had been done to the Australian army had been broken up. And it was one of the things that really hampered them as they went through the rest of the war, was that the units were no longer functioning together under a single command. There was part of it was under British command, and part of it was under Australian command. So I think those were kind of the two things. And Currie himself was a forceful enough personality that by mid-1917, the British Army had started to actually listen to him. So when he said to them, we're not going into Passchendaele until there's a place where we can win, and this is where we're going to win it, and this is how we're going to do it. And it saved a lot of lives.
Thank you, Caitlin. Let's see. Someone can hear my typing. I'll try to keep my mic off. Thank you, Facebook user. Let's see. There's a whole bunch here. Let me just find some. Forgive me for this. Oh, here it is from John Macbeth. I remember reading that McNaughton invented, he puts invented in bunny quotes, the practical uses of creeping barrage. Is this true?
Again, I wouldn't say that it's invented. I would say that it's applied. The French had been using creeping barrages in bits and pieces previously, but McNaughton again was the person who looked at this and thought, okay, we're going to take out as many guns as we can, and then we're going to use the creeping barrage, and here's how we're going to use it, and here's how we're going to apply it. Creeping barrages, we think of them, and we had a conversation about this at work a couple of days ago, and we were all kind of laughing to ourselves, but they're described in a way that makes it sound like you just kind of walk behind all these shells and nothing happens. But they were actually extremely, extremely dangerous. And so a creeping barrage had to be timed down to the second. The artillery had to know exactly where they were moving their guns and raising their guns right down to the second. And the infantry had to advance at exactly the right time. Otherwise, you ended up actually advancing into your own creeping barrage. So it was really, really precise work. And the work that McNaughton did, I think, in making sure that the artillery was capable of running a creeping barrage was extremely important.
I have a comment from one of the viewers, Caitlin. Maybe that you already know this, but Bishop's College School in Lennoxville, Quebec, has a boys' residence named in honor of General McNaughton, known as McNaughton House.
So I didn't know that.
Okay, that's fascinating. Then I didn't know that either. So, and you said that he went there, right?
He
in
did,
your
yes.
presentation.
Yeah,
So.
he went to Bishop's College before going to McGill.
Another question for you is, how did you yourself become interested in General McNaughton?
I'm not really sure. It's kind of hard to say. I am drawn to many of the different characters of the First World War. It was kind of a time when people were very interesting people, and they had really interesting experiences and interesting ways of living. And so starting to read a little bit about McNaughton, he just struck me as a really interesting person. And so, yeah, I really like a character, and that just kind of got me looking at it more and more to see what more I could learn about him.
There's also a comment that said, for the McNaughton family, do you have connections to Hudson, Quebec? There's a road named McNaughton there. Do you know, can you answer that question on behalf of the family, Caitlyn?
I can't. I think that's a question for Andrew or Karen, if they're willing to do it.
And you can also just send us a comment in the chat box in Zoom if you like, if you know. And I know Vicky, who's out in Laval, mentioned that in Saint Eustache de Montagne, there's also some McNaughtons were around there too. So maybe there's a greater connection there. I'm trying to see if we have any more questions. Okay, I don't see anything else. Heather, do you see anything else on your end?
I'm just looking through it's been a lot of comments, Caitlyn, all really positive. Someone would like to know, why is Mr. McNaughton not as well known to Canadians as he should be? Why is he not in the history textbooks, for example?
I think it's again, it's kind of hard to say. There are, and you can see that in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, McNaughton was very well known. You know, the streets named after him. He was a public figure. He had a biography, a large biography written about him. And I think it's sort of the ebb and flow of how things evolve, and how some people drop out of history and other people become more known. And now we really do associate Vimy Ridge with Currie. But, you know, as I said in my presentation, Currie was divisional commander at the time. The person who really commanded Vimy Ridge was actually a British man named Julian Byng. So, you know, it's about how we think about history and how we understand it and think about it. Andrew, did you have anything to add? I know your sister was interested in introducing your mother, if you're willing to do it, but we'll leave it up to you.
Well, can you see us okay? No.
You just turned off your video.
Just about here.
Story of my life.
There you are.
Technology. I'd like to introduce my mother, Helen Leslie, who is obviously my father was General McNaughton's son. And so Nanny Boo, as she's known throughout the clan, is his daughter-in-law. And of all of us, I believe the only one who actually spent years with General McNaughton. So a living repository of knowledge, should anybody wish to have additional questions answered, and certainly not tonight, but later, perhaps Caitlyn, I don't know. Anyways, thank you once again for doing this.
It's very lovely to see you both. Thank you.
Do you want to, sorry, we're just.
He was a wonderful person, so kind and so thoughtful and so natural. He was a super person to know and to be with.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for that. There were a couple other questions on Facebook. I have a feeling we could be here for a while, Caitlyn, but let's have two more questions from Facebook. And let's see. Henry Slack was wondering if McNaughton was involved in establishing the common calibers.
Ooh, that is not something I can answer. I was stumped. I knew someone was going to come up with something highly technical in artillery this evening that was going to completely stump me. So I apologize. I am not able to answer that.
Here's another one, but
certainly some research would show you.
It's pretty impressive. I guess you're expected to know, you know, or people are hoping you know even more about than just beyond McNaughton's life. But here's another one. Was there any big pushback on McNaughton from the old boys club of gunners?
I think that there was certainly some resistance initially. He was the man with the thermometer um, in a tradition that had been fairly fairly unevolved or unevolving, shall we say. But I think what helped and what made his work easier to adopt was that a he was a gunner himself. The militia unit that he commanded was an artillery unit. He was very familiar with it, so he had kind of the street cred, I'll say, of being a gunner himself rather than being a scientist who came, a scientist who came in saying, I know about muzzle caliber, who had never actually fired an artillery piece. So I think that really helped. But you can see certainly it was adopted. It was adopted very quickly in comparison to some of the other things that were used during the First World War. I did have just a question, Glenn, that was sent to me privately from Monty McDonald, if he wanted to unmute himself as well. He had a question about McNaughton's relationship with Curry.
All right, I'll do that. Monty, you're unmuted.
Good. Thank you, Caitlin.
Hi, Monty.
This isn't about trees. This is about...
Don't ask me any technical things about guns either, please.
Well, I happen to be an engineer, and I also served in the artillery for several years in the militia. And I just thinking, here's this engineer, and he's applying all this engineering science to flash spotting, sound ranging, and how he's going to use it to take out those German batteries and so on. Could you just describe his relationship with Curry? Because he must have had to work really hard to get him to listen to him, because Curry wasn't an artillery man, was he?
No. I think that the Vimy planning was done by Byng, Curry, and McNaughton, with other actors as well. And there seemed to be, at that time, in general, a real desire to try to learn what had gone wrong. Because they'd fought the Somme in the summer of 1916, and the British Army had lost 60,000 soldiers in a single day. And it was clear that what they were doing was really not working. And so one of the things that really struck me about Vimy as I was digging more deeply into this was there was McNaughton's trip to 5 Corps and sitting with Haig and learning about what went wrong and asking questions. And then there was also Curry's trip to the French Army, which was the same type of thing. So it was sitting there trying to learn, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. And they both came back full of ideas, and they sat down with Byng, really, and everybody sort of said, okay, how are we going to take what we've learned and look at this and try to construct a plan for this objective that, objectively speaking, we know we can't take without doing anything, without changing what it is that we do. So I'm not sure that it was really a necessarily an idea of convincing. I think what they struggled with later on in the war, and certainly at Vimy, was getting enough guns. And there was the demand, we need more guns, we need more artillery, and with the British command sort of saying, well, we don't have any more to give you, you have as many as you have, and we can only give you this many, so make do with what you have. So I think there's more of a struggle there than necessarily within the command and trying to decide to adopt these types of plans. Sorry, it's a very circular answer, Monty.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Caitlyn, it looks like we're almost finished for the evening. We'll start bringing it to a close. I think people have learned a lot from what you have told us this evening. What I've discovered whenever Vimy Ridge comes up is how many people have a connection to the people that were involved in that battle. And obviously the McNaughton family who are here tonight, which is quite wonderful, have such a wonderful story to tell about an amazing person. My own great uncle was at Vimy as well. I'm so proud of him, and he managed to live and tell the tale. but so many Canadians didn't. And it's such an important battle to remember. And it's so poignant that tomorrow is Vimy Ridge Day. And of course, this was planned that you would speak on today, as close as we could to get to Vimy Ridge Day. So it's important that we remind Canadians about Vimy Ridge and about the contributions of this wonderful Andrew McNaughton that unfortunately a lot of people don't know about. So thank you for spreading the good news about Andrew McNaughton and keeping his memory alive and the work that he did. So it was very powerful. And thank you very much for presenting on Heritage Talks. Thank you too to the McNaughton family for being here, to the people from the Vimy Ridge Foundation, the Vimy Foundation. It was wonderful that you joined us, to all our QAHN friends as well, our members and friends of QAHN. It's great that you joined us this evening. Thank you to Glenn in Master Control, as always, who keeps everything running for us. You'll be interested to know that our next talk is Sunday, April 18th at 1 o'clock in the afternoon with Sandy Beebe up in the Gaspé region. She's coming to us from Kempfer House, and her talk is called World War II, Intrigue and Romance in Gaspésia. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I've heard the story about the spy from hotel room number 11. So it's quite fascinating and I think you'll enjoy it. So more war stories, this time from the Gaspé. So that's Sunday, April 18th at 1 in the afternoon. If you didn't get your questions answered tonight, you can certainly email Caitlyn at the Center of the Canadian Center for the Great War. I'm sure she'll be happy to answer your questions, or leave us questions too on Heritage Talks Facebook as well. So thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you had a great evening, and until next time, stay safe and good night.